Dr. Daniel Halleck, and welcome to the Wild Conversation, where we make the best thinking in psychology, leadership, and organizational science accessible to leaders who are willing to learn and edit for their sake and for the sake of others. What would it take for your organization to become the destination for talent and leaders in your industry? What would it take for your organization to become the destination for talent and leaders in your industry? Today's topic is how to attract the wrong people. So who is the right person anyway? Or the wrong person for that matter? And what are they right or wrong for? We started this series on staffing challenges because it seems that everyone is experiencing this in some way. But the issue isn't just finding people. I know for some of you it is. For some of you, you have businesses where you've actually had to maybe even close a business or a business line or reduce availability because you don't have the staff you need for your business. That's true. But in many cases, for many of us, the staffing challenge isn't just finding people, it's finding the right people. Some of you who are listening today aren't even actually hiring. You're on the job market yourself. And your challenge probably isn't finding a job, it's finding the right job. Or maybe you know of, or you are that person who's looking for that special someone, or maybe you found them. In that case, the issue isn't finding a partner, it's finding the right person. And as a side note, there are so many parallels between dating and hiring. Maybe we'll do another wild conversation on that topic. That's not today. But here's my big idea on the topic. To create the right people, to attract the right people to your mission, carefully cultivate a culture of development and create a congruent brand. I'll say it again. To attract the right people to your mission, carefully cultivate a culture of development and create a congruent brand. Okay, we have to start by the right people versus the wrong people. What do we mean by that anyway? Almost every leader I talk to when it comes to selection or hiring at some point will bring up Jim Collins' statement from Good to Great, that you need to get the right people on the bus. Okay, most will intellectually agree with it. They'll give that a nod. So who are the right people? Come to think of it, what type of bus are we getting on? And for that matter, where the heck are we even going on this bus to begin with? The wrong people, I know that's a pretty strong statement. And of course, there are people who are clearly the wrong fit for a role, for a team, for your organization. But it doesn't mean we're talking about bad people, but it does mean that everyone, we don't necessarily need to have a homogenous group, and we do need people who have diversity. We don't just need the people with the same background and skills. So the wrong fit could be that they're not the right person for our org, or they might not be bringing the right things. Here's what I'd like to suggest. The right people are the ones who align with your mission, bring the necessary skills, competence, and perspective, and are ready and willing to learn and grow for their sake and for the sake of the people around them. Team members, clients, the organization. If you've ever hired the wrong person, you know how important this is. The labor, both emotional labor and actual physical labor, to deal with a difficult person can just drain energy and resources, personally and in a system. And if you're in a smaller, mid-sized organization, it could actually sink the business or the business unit. In fact, the research on team dynamics, and our team will put some of this in the chat for you, strongly suggests that a bad apple can, in fact, spoil the whole barrel if you don't have the right conditions in place. But back to the bus, our ability to get the right people on it depends in large part on what type of bus we're loading and where we even plan to go. So back to that big idea, to attract the right people to your mission, how do we carefully cultivate a culture of development and create a congruent brand? I'm going to start with the culture of development and then move to that congruent brand and give us a couple takeaways that are tactical to think about for each. Okay, I can't help but think about dating and hiring because there are so many fascinating parallels between the two. Again, different conversation for different time. But have you ever had a friend who's on the dating scene? They might be looking for that special someone today. You have a conversation and you ask them, how's it going? They share the challenges with all the fish in the ocean. They can't seem to find the right one. They might even complain that they keep meeting the same type of person. Different people, but really the same person. And they just can't figure out why. Of course, as their friend, it's pretty clear to you. You see it, the way they live, the way they act, the way they carry themselves, what they put on their social media, their entire persona, actual and aspirational. It's just going to draw a certain type of person. You can see it. They don't see it quite yet. All their friends know too. You kind of want to take them aside and just walk them through step by step and say, let me help you connect the dots to show you what you're doing and why you're going to tend to draw and attract the same type of person. Organizations are kind of the same way. Bear with me. I know if some of you are dating, you're like, it's totally different. I know it's different, but there's some similarities. The mix of people in the organization shapes the culture that will tend to draw a certain type of person. Ben Schneider, who's a retired industrial and organizational psychologist, he's often referred to as the father of the concept of employee engagement. He did a lot of the early research that shapes how we think about engagement at work today. And often people reference him as the seminal author. He also, in 1987, wrote a landmark article titled "The People Make the Place." Part of his article was a manifesto calling psychologists, people in my discipline, to remember the power of the person in the organization. Psychologists, the research had focused so much, had tilted to focus on the environment. People were fascinated about situational leadership and how a context shapes a person, that they started to forget about the fact that actually a person is an actor in the context as well. From a whole and intentional leader development perspective, from a wild perspective, his view aligns, because if you've been part of this community, you've heard us talk about a focus on the one with an eye to the many. A focus on the one with an eye to the many, a way to remember that a leader is a person, and that when we over tilt and focus on leadership and systems, which are important, we can miss the person and the people who end up shaping the organization. So he wrote this article called "The People Make the Place." And in it, he also put out this fascinating model to understand organizational behavior at the person level and how it affects the org. And he called it the attraction, selection, attrition model. The attraction, selection, attrition model. And you can find his article on Google Scholar if you want. His fundamental thesis was this: that the way that people are behaving in an organization makes the organizations what they are. Hence his title, "The People Make the Place." That the environment, yes, it impacts people, but it's largely shaped by the people in the context. Now, here's what's fascinating. His model wasn't a prescriptive model of what organizations and leaders should do. He gives a lot of his opinions, to be sure. He gives some diagnostics, but his model was primarily descriptive, not prescriptive. He was focusing on what actually happens, the way things are, not just what somebody should do. So I'm going to give you an oversimplified version of how he describes the ebb and flow of organizational life cycles with the attraction, selection, attrition model. You might think of your own organization or orgs that you've been in as I go through this. The initial founders of the organization, the leaders, or oftentimes the founder, they think, they feel, they act in certain ways. And their beliefs and behaviors end up becoming ingrained and expressed through the goals of the organization. And that both attracts and starts to shape what we often think about as culture, some of those deep assumptions that work their way up to the stuff that we see in the organization. So the culture of the organization that's evolving based on the people, because the people make the place in his premise, will attract certain people to the org. So certain people are going to be attracted based on what we're giving out, kind of like dating. And then our selection mechanisms, the way we hire people, recruiting and hiring, those processes reinforce that culture. And over time, people who don't align, but somehow made it in, or who once aligned, but no longer do, because we change, will attrit from the organization by force or by choice. They'll choose to leave, or we'll push them out in some way. That's what happened. That's the oversimplified. There's a lot more to that, but that's the basic sense. We attract certain people, we end up selecting them, that reinforces, and then that impacts who ends up staying with the organization longer term. Interestingly, Schneider points out that if the attraction, selection, attrition model is true, it actually restricts the range of diversity in an organization over time. The range of people quite literally gets narrower. You get a more homogeneous org. And again, as a side note, this could be a whole nother series. It harmonizes with the research on diversity in teams and orgs. People often say, oh, well, diversity is good for an organization. It is, but to make that happen, to diversify an organization, whether that's diversity in biography or diversity in skills, often creates a little bit of a dip. So things might feel like they're getting worse before they actually get better, because we're just faced with different perspectives, beliefs, assumptions, ways of doing things. Over time, it actually gives us a competitive advantage because we can tackle different unique challenges and complexities as things change. We have more agility, but at first, it actually feels like it's getting a little bit harder. And even a simple example, if there's an organization that's created a great product, they're just known for attracting people based on their product, and then somebody comes in and says, we're going to turn ourselves into a sales organization. We're hiring a VP of sales for the first time, and we're going to hire a sales team, and everybody now is involved in sales in some way. Okay, that's going to change. People are going to resist that change because it's just different, even if that might be the right direction for the organization. But eventually, as that shift happens, it'll change the culture a little bit, and people will change their expectations. Some will leave, and it'll attract new people. The people make the place. Okay, so what does this have to do with carefully cultivating a culture of leader development? And what the heck does it have to do with WILD, with whole and intentional leader development? Maybe everything. Here's my first tactical takeaway is, as we carefully cultivate a culture of development to attract the right people, the tactical takeaway is double down on developing people. Double down on developing people. The people make the place, and the place will attract the right people. But if you don't create opportunities for people to learn, to grow, to change, and change is a synonym for development, you'll get a narrowing function of skills and experience that will help you in the short term. You'll be able to move faster because everyone thinks the same way, but slower in the long term. Think back to the tortoise and the hare. The extent to which your culture, made up of the people within it, because culture is an amorphous thing, people are actual, to the extent that your culture is defined by learning and development, you'll attract people increasingly who are ready and willing to change, to edit themselves, and to learn and adapt and adopt new perspectives for changing complex challenges. So yes, getting the right people on the bus matters, but what if the bus takes a detour and you end up boarding a plane instead? And then you have a connecting trip on a ship. Management thinker Peter Senge coined the term learning organization. It's become popular in HR and learning spaces, and it's a great concept and it has competitive advantages. But at the end of the day, a learning organization is made up of learning people. And this is where it connects to leadership. Leaders are the front runners in shaping this. And that's why investing in the learning and development of your leaders is such a competitive advantage. It takes time, it's hard work, but it can create that valuable, rare, and difficult to imitate thing in whatever space you're in. That's why when we bring the WILD system into an organization, we go deep quickly. My assumption is it's a positive disruption in a long-term effort to create a culture of leader development. So double down on people development. And as you do, you will continue to attract the right people who are ready to willing to learn and grow and change and accept new ideas. And it will also be a subtle warning to people who aren't interested in developing and changing that this might not be the right place for them, at least not now. So I could talk about creating a culture of development all day long. It's literally my job, and it's the work we do at WILD through our system for whole and intentional leader development. But what about brand? Where does that fit in? You don't hear us talk about brand often. Brands are fascinating because they're an external reflection of the internal capacity and character of an organization. or a collection of people. That's true for a personal brand or an organizational brand. Your brand, your identity, your reputation, they ride this tightrope in the tension between actual and aspirational, where we are and where we want to be. We've all seen this. You can have a polished brand. It looks like $1 million, but when you get close to the organization, if that brand promise falls short, your expectations are broken and you lose trust in that brand and the people within it. So the brand has to be congruent with the culture, both for customers and for employees, whatever the stakeholder is. If the brand is too aspirational, there's issues because we quickly see that there's not integrity. So we want a little bit of aspiration, but we also need to keep it actual. If I were to go into your organizations and do a deep dive and evaluate and score your brand and score your culture, this is what I think would be the formula. The formula for the attractiveness of your organization would be this. Attractiveness equals culture divided by brand multiplied by time. Attractiveness would be culture divided by brand multiplied by time. You have to have the culture. And how is that reinforced or displayed in the brand? And then to the extent that those are congruent, the function of time is what will draw that attractiveness in. Becoming a destination for talent where we attract the right people and help the wrong people find a different, better fit for themselves requires the careful cultivation of a culture of development and the creation of a congruent brand. There are different halves of the coin that looks like your team or organization. And by the way, this could be your organizational brand, or it could be, hey, Daniel, I'm on a team within a larger organization. You still have a brand for your team and people know about it. So culture, brand, those are big things. Where do I start? What can I do tomorrow? So here's the second tactical takeaway. And then I'm going to ask you a couple diagnostic questions. Have you ever interviewed for a role, gotten excited about the opportunity, accepted the job, only to discover that once you started, things were not as they appeared? And for sure, every job has a honeymoon phase, but one of the big predictors of turnover is mismatched expectations. So here's the tactical takeaway, and there's a lot of research on this. You can go to Google Scholar and look it up again. Realistic job previews are one of my favorite mechanisms for displaying the culture in the brand through an interview process. Recruiting and interviewing is one of those tactical places where the tension between culture and brand comes up. You want to attract the right people. You want to compel them to take the role. Job descriptions are a marketing piece. At the same time, you want to discern who you should hire, and you don't want to overshoot the role and what it entails, or you do not set everybody up for a win. Dr. McKenna and I were just interviewed for an article in Forbes on leadership, courage, and reluctance. And reluctance is a fascinating topic for leaders. Healthy reluctance, counting the cost, is an interesting thing. Most candidates should have some reluctance for the job, or you've oversold it. I'm not saying they should be scared away, but they should have some healthy reluctance. We want candidates who are excited about the org, but who come with a little bit of a healthy dose of reality about what to expect, so they can be actors in our organization, people who want to learn and grow. They know where they can contribute and how they can join us. They know what's actual and they know what's aspirational we're working towards. Actually helps us reduce turnover and create the place that attracts the right people without narrowing that homogeny. So what would it take for your organization to become the destination for talent and leaders in your industry? That's our big goal for every organization we work with. As you carefully cultivate a culture of development and create and communicate a congruent brand, it will help to attract the right people to your mission and leave room for different people to join and help us shape the future. So let me give you 3 diagnostic questions to process. First, how far is the distance between your internal culture and your external brand? How congruent are they? How far is that distance? Second, what is important for newcomers in your organization to know before they join? I want to invite them to something great, and I also want them to know what they're getting into. Same thing works for dating, it turns out. And lastly, what's one bold move that you can take to double down on a culture of development in your team or organization? If developing that culture for the long term is what's going to create the congruency for our brand to communicate and attract the right people and perpetuate that, what is one bold move you can do to double down on developing that culture in your team or your organization? Let's talk about it.